When Donald Trump unleashed a new trade war against China, many thought it would only be a matter of time before they were forced to give in. They sell almost $600 billion worth of goods to the United States every year and depend on the US for nearly 15% of all their exports. On the surface, it seemed obvious that they couldn't survive, but what they did next surprised the world. Instead of backing down, they responded quickly. They matched the tariffs, cut off key exports, and sent a clear message: we don't care. But something doesn't add up. How can a country that apparently depends on selling goods survive without its biggest customer? Well, behind the scenes, something has changed. Welcome to Urbanio. While Donald Trump was busy playing tough guy, China quietly built a secret plan to live without America. And now, it's paying off. In the last decade, China has been secretly rebuilding the foundations of its economy. Instead of spending, they are investing, with 40% of their annual GDP allocated to investments each year, almost double that of any other major economy, and the results are hard to ignore. Chinese companies are rising up to replace American ones at the top of the food chain. BYD has surpassed Tesla as the largest electric vehicle manufacturer. TikTok has become one of the largest and fastest-growing social media platforms in the world, and Chinese brands everywhere are scaling up rapidly. China is not just trying to survive without the United States, it's showing the world that it can lead without it. So, has China really become economically indestructible? Or is all of this just smoke and mirrors? You've probably seen the headlines. China's real estate market collapsing, the economy crumbling under an aging population, and millions of young people unemployed. And yet, mega factories are being built every day. The high-speed train now connects the entire country, and some of the world's most advanced technology no longer comes from the West. So which is the real China? The truth is, it's both. The West is caught between these two contradictory realities, struggling to understand the new China, because the story we've been telling ourselves for decades is starting to fall apart. Since opening up to trade in the 1970s, China's economic boom has been driven by the West. The world's largest population came with low wages, and China took advantage of that to become a manufacturing hub. They built factories for Apple, powered Amazon's supply chain, and attracted billions in Western investment. From the 1990s through the 2000s, China's economy grew at an astonishing rate, with annual GDP growth close to 10% for years. The model was simple: China manufactured and the United States bought. It was remarkably fast, incredibly cheap, and highly efficient, but it was also deeply dependent. For many decades, the United States of America and the People's Republic of China were deeply intertwined trading partners, fostering a complex economic relationship. China became the world's factory, exporting cheap goods to American consumers and attracting trillions in foreign investment every year. By 2010, China had become the world's second-largest economy, and its factories were no longer just cheap, they were also becoming smart. In places like Shenzhen, the same assembly lines that once produced knockoffs were slowly learning from their experience, now producing cutting-edge technology at a fraction of the US cost. At the same time, the United States kept importing more and more of them. By 2018, China's trade surplus with the United States had grown to over $400 billion, and concerns about economic dependence were beginning to rise. The idea that a rising authoritarian power could have so much control over global supply chains, and by extension over the entire US economy, became a threat too big to ignore. To make matters worse, between 2001 and 2017, the United States lost more than 3 million manufacturing jobs, many of them outsourced to China, and gradually the media and politicians began to point fingers. Chinese companies thrived in the US market, gaining market share, lowering prices, and scaling up quickly. But American companies couldn't penetrate the Chinese market in the same way. Many began to accuse the Chinese government of playing dirty, giving money to their companies to make their products cheaper, and protecting their largest firms with anti-competitive laws so that foreign competitors had no chance. And the idea of confronting China was starting to gain momentum during those years. So, when Donald Trump first ran for president in 2016 with the promise to confront Chinese trade practices once and for all, he won. Almost immediately after taking office, he fulfilled his promise by imposing trade tariffs on Chinese goods worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The logic was simple: raise the cost of importing from China and push American companies to bring production back home, protecting local manufacturing. But that still wasn't enough. The United States also protected its technological advantage built over decades and did everything possible to prevent China from taking the lead. They put Huawei on the blacklist, banned American companies from selling critical chips, and restricted China's access to advanced semiconductors. This was no longer just about trade, it was a matter of strategic dominance. Between 2018 and 2020, the tension only escalated and then eased under Biden's administration. He didn't aggressively increase tariffs like Trump did, but he didn't reduce them either. The direction was clear. Decoupling had begun. And by 2025, under a second Trump administration, the conflict returned with force. A new wave of tariffs was announced, targeting Chinese electric vehicles, solar equipment, batteries, and key technological components. Some tariffs reached 100%, sending a clear message: we are done with dependence. But this time, something was different. The first time, China was cautious. It negotiated, made concessions, and tried to de-escalate. But now China responded immediately, matched the tariffs, banned the export of rare earths, and put American companies on its own blacklist. This was not the China of 2001, nor even that of 2016. It was a new China, bolder, more self-assured, and ready to strike back. And for many in the West, it was a wake-up call. Had China quietly built an economy that no longer needed the United States? The trade war was no longer just about trade. It had become a battle over who would shape the future of the global economy. And for the first time in decades, the United States might not have the final say. Beijing knows exactly what the rest of the world profoundly suspects, that a truly giant economy built primarily on extensive exports simply cannot survive and thrive if the entire world completely stops buying its products and goods. So, over the past decade, China has been quietly trying to reshape its economy, shifting from a machine fueled by US demand to a system that can operate on its own. At the heart of this transformation is a concept introduced by Xi Jinping, a strategy known as dual circulation, which will lay the foundation for a new kind of Chinese economy, one designed to be resilient, self-sufficient, and much less exposed to the West. In 2024, the country's domestic consumption actually accounted for 45% of GDP, more than double that of exports. And in fact, this has already been happening for some time. Over the past decade, household consumption has consistently contributed to at least half of China's GDP growth, which means that the vast majority of its production is consumed domestically. Chinese citizens are buying Chinese cars, Chinese electronics, and even Chinese luxury brands. But no matter how good it sounds, this level of consumption is still very weak, especially when compared to other major economies, where we regularly see households spending between 60 and 70% of GDP. And even though the Chinese government has tried to get people to spend more through policies like cheap loans and subsidized trade-in programs, most families remain cautious, paying down debt and saving money. Why? Because the real problem remains unsolved. Despite being a socialist country, social safety nets like unemployment benefits and pension support are practically non-existent. China spends less than 1% of its GDP on social protection programs, one of the lowest levels in the world, which makes it incredibly difficult for people to withstand economic shocks, job losses, or health emergencies. At the same time, its real estate market is in crisis. Since 2019, property value growth has been in constant decline, and now many households are even losing value, with homes costing on average 4.5% less than last year. And as if that weren't enough, China's birth rate has dropped so much that there are more people dying than being born. If this continues, they are on track to have one of the world's most rapidly aging and shrinking workforces. This makes many families feel the pressure to save for healthcare, retirement, or their children's education. So, while domestic consumption is certainly growing, it still hasn't fully taken over the economy. The truth is that China's economy still relies heavily on factories, exports, and investment. But the shift toward consumer spending is real, even if it's slow. China wants to become resilient, to build an economy that won't collapse if American consumers stop buying or if the West imposes new sanctions. So it is building an economic system designed to weather the storm. A key part of this strategy is changing its trading partners. China is not betting on the world remaining friendly. It is preparing for a future where it doesn't have to ask for permission. In the year 2000, the United States bought more than 20% of China's exports, but by 2023, that figure had dropped to just 15%. At first glance, it seemed that China was losing ground, as exports to its largest market were falling. But in reality, its share of global exports kept increasing. China hasn't changed how much it exports, but rather to whom it exports. From Southeast Asia to South America, Chinese products are everywhere, and Asian countries are now China's main trading partners. In Africa, Chinese investment in infrastructure has tapped into the appetite for its abundant minerals. In Latin America and the Middle East, demand for Chinese machinery, energy, technology, and consumer goods is booming. Piece by piece, China is steadily moving away from its dependence on developed markets like the United States and turning toward the global South. And how did they achieve this? They built railways through the mountains of Laos, ports in Sri Lanka, highways in Kenya, and power plants in Pakistan. This is the Belt and Road Initiative, an ambitious strategy launched in 2013 to connect China with the rest of the world through infrastructure, financing, and building major projects across the globe. And it has become the backbone of China's strategy to forge strong relationships with new potential trading partners. And although no one was sure it could succeed, a decade later, the results are hard to ignore. By 2024, more than 140 countries have joined the Belt and Road, collectively representing almost 75% of the world's population. But the Belt and Road is not just about roads and bridges. It's about influence. By financing essential infrastructure in countries where Western investment was minimal, China has embedded itself in economic arteries, and in return, it is gaining loyal trading partners, securing demand for Chinese products, and above all, reducing its dependence on the United States. The numbers speak for themselves. The group of Asian countries has already surpassed the United States as China's largest trading partner, purchasing Chinese exports worth $500 billion in 2024 alone. At the same time, they have become the largest trading partner of South Africa, Brazil, Indonesia, and many other key members of the BRICS alliance, a group of emerging economies from the global south that now represent 45% of the world's population. Despite this, the United States remains significant for China, and moving away from such a powerful market will undoubtedly still cause it harm. But China knows it cannot rely solely on consumers and trade. To truly stand out, it must build a powerful engine underneath, one driven by massive investment, cutting-edge technology, and solid infrastructure. Since 2018, China has invested more than $500 billion in R&D. It is subsidizing strategic industries, trying to surpass the West, aiming to be able to produce independently and control some of the most advanced technologies on the planet. In many industries, China is producing far more than the market needs. More steel than it can use, more solar panels than it can install, and more electric vehicles than it can sell domestically. For many in the West, this seemed like an imminent overcapacity problem. By flooding the market with too much supply, prices will fall, making the industry less profitable than it could be. But for China, overcapacity is not a flaw. It is being used as a weapon. By flooding the world with affordable products, China embeds itself in crucial parts of global supply chains. Europe needs Chinese solar panels for its green transition. American electric cars need Chinese batteries to run. And buildings all across Asia need Chinese steel. So instead of being a weakness, the more China manufactures, the more the world depends on it. And it becomes increasingly difficult to say no to it. But to keep the engine running, China has had to keep spending and has been forced to rely heavily on borrowed money, accumulating public debt at a pace not seen in decades. By 2026, China will continue to surpass public debt levels of 100% of GDP, and this could be signaling the risk that it is driving growth faster than it can absorb. We've seen this before: ghost cities, idle factories, high-speed train lines with few passengers. If China continues building more than its economy can actually use, all this investment could end up going to waste. The relationship between the United States and China is no longer what it used to be. The days of quiet interdependence when China manufactured and the United States bought are over. In a way, China no longer needs the United States like it used to. It has built new factories, new trade routes, and new alliances. It is investing trillions in its own technology, fueling its own consumer market, and investing in an economic machine designed to withstand any storm that comes its way. But that doesn't mean it's untouchable. China still hasn't completely replaced the West. Its consumers don't spend like Americans do. Its chip industry is still lagging behind, and its economy still bears the scars of a real estate crisis, weak demand, and growing debt. What China is not doing is backing down. It is quietly rebuilding, steadily. It is creating something different, a parallel economic system, less exposed to US pressure and more embedded in the global south. Because this is no longer just about trade wars or sanctions. It's about whether the United States can still set the course in a world where China no longer plays by its rules. The era of US-led globalization is fading. And the question is not whether China will survive, but how the rest of the world will adapt. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Here on Urbanio, we'll be posting new stories and ideas regularly. You won't want to miss what's coming next.